and welcome to the Tuesday, December 10th, 2019 Select Board meeting. This is a special meeting of the Brattleboro Select Board and contains only budget items on the agenda. Has this meeting been properly warned, Jan?
Yes, it has.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear so. At this time, I would ask the town manager if he has comments.
Thank you. Yes, just a quick update regarding the compliance work that we're doing at 4850 Central Street and 6 Reynolds Drive in follow-up to the health order that you adopted 2 weeks ago now. So last Thursday, December 5th, there was a re-inspection. There was not much progress found there. You'll recall that the week prior, the most urgently needed violations had been cured in terms of things like smoke alarms and so on. But there was a lot more work to be done, both to the electrical system and for other safety matters, to remove a lot of material that is considered fuel for fires that poses a risk. Most of those violations that had been cited previously have not been cured. The owner was on site along with inspectors from both the state and the town, and the owner was reminded of the importance of getting this work done and getting it done promptly. A re-inspection was scheduled for this Thursday, December 12th. The inspectors will go back, take another look. In the meantime, based on the lack of progress, because we didn't see, you'll recall that the law requires us to be patient as long as steady progress is being made. But when steady progress isn't being made, there are escalating penalties that the town can impose. Because progress was not being made in curing these violations, daily fines have been put in place, and the number of violations is so great that it's actually the maximum allowable daily fine of $800 a day per address. So there's $1,600 a day worth of fines being imposed. Those are accumulating. And the next step, if the inspection this Thursday doesn't show that very substantial progress has been made, will be to file for an injunction from the court to have a court order that would compel that the corrective action be taken by a certain date. So that inspection will definitely occur on Thursday. We'll let you know what comes of that and whether or not additional action and going to court for the injunction is necessary.
Thank you, Peter. Can you, for this board's benefit and also for the public's benefit, remind us of what's happening with the tenants of these locations during this time?
Absolutely. So they are still on premises because of the fact that the most urgently needed repairs, the most imminent threats to public safety have been addressed. The longer term threats to public safety have not. So for instance, if the questionable electrical service and or the material that's in these dwellings that could cause, that could fuel a fire. If there was a fire at these locations, the fact that there are working smoke detectors in the locations where they're required to be caused the state fire inspector to say, while there's still a risk of fire that is greater than what is allowed under the law, the threat that such a fire would pose to human life is substantially reduced by the fact that there are warning devices in place. And so in that balancing act that goes on with this kind of a compliance matter, rather than displacing all of the folks who are living there, who are not at fault for the circumstances that they're in those dwellings, rather than displacing them, they're being allowed to stay in place while the corrective action is taken. But the corrective action needs to be taken. There may come a time when it's necessary to readdress the question of assisting those individuals and families in relocating as part of enforcing the requirement that these violations be corrected.
Thank you. Are there members of the board that have questions or comments on the update that Peter has given us on these properties and the situation?
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
I kind of do. I don't know if it'll be appropriate for you to answer the question, but I'll ask it anyway. I mean, so the fine sounds pretty hefty, and has the landlord indicated that he'll be able to make that fine? Because I guess I'm kind of reading between the lines that maybe some of this work didn't get done in the past because there wasn't available cash flow or something like that. So whether these fines help.
Here's what I'd say about that. It's possible that that is at least a contributing factor to why corrective action hasn't been taken, but it's not a sufficient explanation. This landlord has had months of notice of the problems at these properties and the necessity of curing them, and has allowed them to continue and has endangered the tenants. And so we've progressed, and I mentioned this actually when you had your hearing a couple of weeks ago. We've progressed to a very unusual stage here. It's not uncommon that we identify these kinds of deficiencies. That's why the new rental housing registration and more regular inspection program has been created. But what normally happens when we find them is we address the landlord, say you got to do these things to correct this and make the place safe again, and then they do. In some instances, they're slow to do that, and we have to turn it into a written violation notice rather than just pointing out the need to make the repairs. In very, very rare occasions, the formal ticketing, the notice, and then the follow-up with a ticket and a fine doesn't get the landlord's attention, and we end up here, like we did in this case. From there, the only places to go are the larger daily fine and then ultimately a court order. And we're in the daily fine stage and knocking on the door of the court order.
Okay.
Great, thank you. We look forward to further updates on this extremely important human rights issue. At this time, I will go to members of the public for public participation. This is your opportunity to bring up comments on something that is not on tonight's agenda. And while we can't engage in a full and robust conversation because it hasn't been warned, you do have the opportunity to bring something up. Is there anybody who would like to speak? Yes. Please come up to the microphone right next to you. And for the people who are watching us, state your name and where you're from. You tip it. Yep, that's totally fine.
My name is Robin Flatley, and I'm from Brattleboro. Public speaking is not that much fun for me.
No
Okay.
worries.
All right. I share a cautionary tale of my childhood hero, Madame Curie. Madame Curie and her husband Pierre were pioneers in the study of what they called radioactivity. They experienced radium burns and were exposed to extensive doses of radiation during their research. Although her many decades of exposure to radiation caused chronic illness and her death, she never really acknowledged the health risks of radiation exposure. Focusing on the possibility of 5G in my favorite town in the United States literally makes me sick. I saw how impassioned Tim Wessel was when he stated that the select board would never hurt our children. I know he means this. I can see it in his face. I can hear it in his voice. But what if he can't protect our future? What if what he is saying is misinformation that has been put out to the public through the companies like Verizon, who stand to lose a great deal of money if 5G doesn't become a reality? What if you expose our precious children to 5G and harm them? We can't take that back. We can't afford to risk the future generations of humans, animals, insects, to the vagary of no credible proof of the safety of 5G. I encourage this board to be inspired by our neighboring state of New Hampshire, who is considering establishing a commission to study the health effects of 5G networks. I'm encouraged by several leaders in Congress who have written to the Federal Communications Commission expressing concern about potential health risks. And as added incentive for our board, I share that Mill Valley, California, the city council blocked the deployment of new 5G wireless cells. I'd love to believe Tim's impassioned assurance that the board would never make a decision that would hurt us or our children? What if that experiment goes awfully wrong? What if we sacrifice our children to the possible ill effects of 5G? What if yelling fire in the movie theater is not enough of a wake-up call to save us or them? I implore the board to speak up for the children who don't have a powerful voice and say, slow down and stop 5G. Prove to me it's safe. It's not my job to prove to you it's not safe. Remember that Madame Curie never really actually acknowledged the health risks of radiation exposure. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Franz?
Franz Reichsman, District 2, and also Finance Committee. I just want to throw in a word about the email I sent to board members and Peter and Patrick about municipal broadband and what's being done in the state of Kentucky with regard to that. I know it's not on the agenda tonight, and Tim was kind enough to remind me that it's on the agenda for next week, I think. So I will be interested in what happens then, although I don't think I can be at that meeting. I would like to urge that money be included in the budget for fiscal year 2021 to enable us to take steps forward with municipal broadband if they're found to be warranted. I think it would be more than worth having that in the budget and ready to go for when the plans are set. I don't think it's something where a delay makes any kind of sense. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Franz. That's good feedback, especially if you won't be here next week. I appreciate you speaking. Are there other members who would like to speak? Ricky? Are you by yourself tonight, Ricky?
Not in spirit. I am Ricky from District 2, and I have several motions I would like to share, including that although I don't speak at every opportunity for public participation, I would appreciate there to be ongoing weekly meetings here, because there are a lot of crises going on, and providing that space for people to express themselves in person is very important. And to also have the select board respect the public participation when we vote along with motions as well, and to count us as equals in that regard. Does that make sense?
No, can you tell me that differently so I can make the note that I want to make?
When there are motions being passed, like there was I think if I remember correctly, last week a motion about taxing marijuana, and it's like the board was asked to vote on moving forward in that direction, and I voted against that as a public member, and I think that public members should be counted equally during these voting sessions. I think that would encourage direct democracy practices.
Thank you. I understand that better now. Thanks, Ricky. Okay. At this time, I am going to close public participation and move us into new business. Tonight, we are focused on FY21 proposed budget items, and we begin with our first item being the town manager's office. Peter.
Thank you. So our weekly reminder to the public that at brattleboro.org, the town's website, you can click on FY21 proposed budget on the right side of the homepage under news. It's FY21 proposed budget, which will link you to a page that has a number of different documents related to our budget on there. And the one that you'd want to be looking at tonight is the third down, FY21 proposed budget. That's got the 18 pages of line items. And we'll begin this evening at the top of page 5, which is the budget for the town manager's office.
Thank you for walking us through that, Peter.
Sure. As you see, there's it's a small budget. It's almost entirely personnel costs in our case for the 4 employees, the 3 of us who are here with you every week. Jan and Patrick and myself, and Sally Nix, our Human Resources Director, is also in our office budget. So there are the salary increases of 2% that are identified there. And the reason you see training eliminated, the $500 that's been a recurring budget item, is because we typically don't spend against that. You can see the actuals have been zero for years. The training that we do attend is typically either a professional conference or something that's related to the work of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. In some cases, actually both, like Town Fair. And so those get charged to other line items elsewhere related to conferences and memberships. And so this particular training line item we zeroed out in our proposed budget for the coming year. We reduced postage because these days we're just doing so much more communication that the old $1,000 a year of postage is more than we need. And so we're reducing that to $500. And the transportation line item is increased because of the fact that we now have Sally as part of our town manager's office team. And so we're incurring a greater amount of mileage reimbursement for the travel that's done as part of the work that we do. So we proposed an increase there. Total proposed budget for the department of $313,580 for FY21. Which is an increase of about $6,000 or 2%.
Okay. Just finish my note. Great, thank you very much, Peter. Members of the board have questions or comments about our first budget department topic?
I'm afraid I don't.
Pretty straightforward.
There's not a whole lot hiding in there.
What we're going to find as we go through tonight is, with rare exceptions, because this is the sort of potpourri of smaller segments of our budget, it's all pretty clear and it's not changing much. I'll call out the things that are changing from year to year. It's less complex than some of the other evenings that we spent together on the budget.
Heard.
Can I move on to finance?
Thank you.
Are you okay with that, members of the public?
The
All right.
finance department budget is on about the same scale as the town manager's office budget. Total of proposed $360,800. In this case, actually, because of the minor changes that I'll go through in a moment, the increase is only about $3,000 or less than 1%. And the main reason for that is zeroing out the vacation buyback retirement pay line item, which had $6,500 in it in anticipation of John O'Connor's retirement, and doesn't need to have anything. That was in FY20, doesn't need to have anything in it in FY21. That $6,500 almost offsets the increase in the salaries for the employees of the finance department. And so it's a small increase, less than 1% for the department.
Great. Questions or comments from the board?
Moving on to the attorney. This, of course, is a contract that we have with Bob Fisher and his firm. And so we're proposing that contract amount for the legal services that he provides be increased by 2%, same amount that we're anticipating as a salary increase for non-union employees. No increase in the other two line items. Overall, a 1.9% increase in the proposed budget for attorneys' services to $116,364.
Great, thank you.
Is that,
So I noticed that litigation
I
expenses.
got a question. So.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
teasing.
The Vermont League of Cities and Towns paid for a lot of that litigation, so we
Yes.
don't have to pay it.
That's correct. So what's here is for things like, for instance, the work, if we have to go for an injunction on this code compliance matter that we're dealing with, then that's going to be an out-of-pocket expense where we're proactively incurring litigation expenses that are unrelated to defending ourselves against a claim. When we're defending ourselves against a claim, those expenses are either mostly or sometimes entirely paid for by by Passive as our insurer.
I was just curious about the contracted 2%. Is that tied per year currently, or?
That's discretionary. It's at the discretion of the board. It is the practice we have followed during the 5 budgets that I've helped the board put together. I think it's a fair practice. Bob provides a tremendous amount of service and is always available. It was something actually when I first arrived and saw the retainer arrangement as opposed to just an hourly rate that I took a look at, wanted to make sure we were getting value. I think we get a lot of value from it, and the fact that it protects the town against upside risk. So again, back to we're about to go into court, and we might have to go into court. He's been on this very matter. He's been to court already. Likely going to have to go and file something and then follow through on that and make additional visits. All of that comes free to us, so to speak. It comes included within the retainer for the work that Bob is doing, which would be the vast majority of the expenses we would bear in such a situation. What this litigation line item for is just the out-of-pocket costs to pay the court filing fee and that sort of thing. So the fact that the town is protected in situations where we end up needing to lean very heavily on Bob, either because of a complicated ordinance, which happens actually, a couple of times a year usually, that we have to work through something where he's the primary person working on it. All those hours he invested in the communication and will continue to invest in communicating with Joanne Sakala and the others around the opioids litigation. All of that's included within the monthly fee. I think it's a good deal for the town. It's a not insignificant expense because legal services are not inexpensive.
I think I'm just asking mainly because the last 2 years I haven't asked any questions.
Sure. Yeah. So it's my recommendation that we do a 2% increase annually,
So
because that's what we've been doing.
It's not written into his contract.
That's correct.
It's discretionary. And just because you mentioned it, I've been on retainer agreements with other clients myself. Some of them have asked me to actually report hours just to give me a sense of, give them a sense of what I'm doing this month versus another month. Has that ever been done, or informally, or?
It hasn't
otherwise?
been done in the last 5 years. I don't know whether it's been done in the past. Bob's been town attorney for a good long time.
I was just curious, if the feeling of a good value is just the feeling, or if it's actually based on data.
So in 2015, we actually did some analysis around it. I don't recall the details of that, and it didn't require him to document monthly hours. But we actually did look at sort of estimates of hours worked on different aspects of the services he provides to the town, and I became satisfied at that time in my advice to the board that this was good value. Again, from having served in retainer relationships, there are months when he's being paid for more than what that would equate to in terms of sort of average number of hours. But then there are months when we demand a lot more of him, and it's that same flat monthly rate.
When everyone should be reassured, everyone out there, that when we need Bob,
he's always
comes
available.
and he's available for us. So I'm not questioning the value at all. I'm just questioning how the process is.
Fair questions. Yeah.
Thank you.
Further questions?
No, good.
Oh, but Daniel, and then I have another one.
My question's already been answered.
Oh, first of all, I never heard a lawyer who didn't mark down his hours. Like, that's just weird. He must do it somewhere.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then, do we pay for him to go to conferences on our behalf?
Occasionally. You can see it's been very small expenses. So this would be, for instance, attending like a legal seminar or something else where it's specifically the town asking him to go on our behalf.
Not his own.
It's not his own
professional-
continuing education.
Yeah.
He pays for that himself.
And I assume he has other clients who are other towns.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's got other municipal clients and he's also got private clients.
Thank you.
Further questions? Okay, moving on.
Hillary's up next.
We move
The
on
town
to
clerk's
the
office.
town clerk's office, and Hillary Francis comes to the fancy table. Hello, Hillary. All right, you can lead us through this however you'd like.
All right. So I guess I'd like to start by just giving an overview of our department. We're a small department. We have 2 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff. And we do a variety of different tasks in our office. A lot of people know us as the keepers of records. So we keep land records, we keep vital records. We don't only keep those records, we issue certified copies of those records. We preserve those records and restore old records. We also, in addition to the vital records that we issue a number of licenses. So if somebody needs a marriage license, they come to us. Liquor licenses, entertainment licenses, dog licenses, Green Mountain Passport, which allows veterans and folks over the age of 62 to spend $2 and visit state parks for the rest of their lives. So it's a really good deal. We sell cemetery plots. We staff the Board of Civil Authorities, which deals with property tax assessment appeals as well as planning for elections. We also staff the Board of Abatements. We issue oaths and appointments. And then particularly for this upcoming year, it's always a big deal, but this upcoming year, elections. So dealing with all of the election logistics from start to finish, as well as voter registration, checklists, representative town meeting, all of those different facets of an election. So 2021 is a big election year for us, or 2020, but fiscal year 2021. And one thing, so moving into our budget, you'll notice that for the most part, it's pretty steady from year to year. One thing to note is in the odd numbered fiscal years, we have, instead of just town meeting and representative town meeting, we also have state primaries in August, and we have the general elections in November, which we don't have in our even numbered years. So you'll see that our records retention line item goes up in those even numbered years to roughly 6,000, and it zeroes out in the odd numbered years, and we add that to our election budget. So other than that, the things to point out, our postage expense went up due to postage costs increasing. And then our election salaries and election expense went up for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's that odd fiscal year. But we also, as Peter pointed out when he did the overview of the budget as a whole, we've increased costs like food for representative town meeting and childcare for representative town meeting, so those come out of the election budget. We also, assuming that we're at the BUHS gym again for representative town meeting, we don't have to pay for the use of the gym, but we do have to pay for facilities and maintenance, and that cost is a little bit higher than it is at BAMS. So we accounted for that. And then 1,800 of that is, so we have these accessible voting machines. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with them. It's a tablet that's like a glorified pen. Somebody can come in and vote using it. They can use touchscreen. There's the opportunity to use headphones and have it be audio. So there's 3 different ways. There's a navigation pad that they can use. So if somebody's visually impaired, it gives them the ability to vote independently without having somebody have to do it for them. And then it's not connected to the internet. It's not connected to anything. It prints a ballot for them that they can then put in the tabulator just like anybody else voting. So it gets commingled with the rest of the ballots. And so the Board of Civil Authorities voted, the state is required to fund this for us for state and federal elections. They do not fund it for us for local elections. So the Board of Civil Authorities asked to put $1,800 additional into the budget to be able to offer that to the public for our local elections. So that's seen there as well. And I think those are the main call-outs. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
What's the salary like for people that work on the elections?
So people have a choice to either volunteer their time or get paid. This year it was $10.78 per hour. Starting January 1, I believe that salary goes up to $10.96 an hour.
Minimum wage.
Yep. Any other
Further
questions?
questions? You do a lot in that office.
We do.
Thank you
My
for
pleasure.
keeping the town running in all those ways that you just described. It's great.
Speaking of elections, just off the top of your head, when will petitions for town offices be available?
They are available.
They are
Oh, they are.
Yep.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Somebody asked me that.
Yeah,
Okay.
they were available starting in November.
That's what I thought.
Right after the new year, I will send out reminder letters
Signatures don't
and
go stale after
notices.
90 days?
Right, right. So
Okay.
they're available. Anybody can come by at any point and pick one up.
Great. Thank you. Good question, David.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Hillary.
Have you got yours yet, David?
No, I will tomorrow.
General service. Oh,
Yeah, Ricky, come ahead.
Question me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll sit back down.
Sorry, I couldn't quite see you.
Does the budget account for offering representatives any minimum wage salary or minimum wage or more?
It does not.
Is there any motion for that to occur?
That has not come up. I'm assuming that that would need to come out of representative town meeting. And that hasn't come up
Yep.
by the select board to put it on the warning or through petition to put it on the warning. So if it were petitioned or motioned by the select board, then it would get put on the warning and then the reps would have a chance to vote on it.
I hope to see that happen.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ricky. Sorry I didn't see you right off.
general
Thank you.
services.
General services, please, Peter.
Sure.
Thanks, Hillary.
So, general services and auxiliary services, which comes up in a little bit, are sort of catch-alls for a variety of different expenses. General services primarily internal and auxiliary services primarily external. The changes from FY20 adopted budget to FY21 proposed for general services, I'm at the bottom of page 6. Include a small increase, $250 in IT salaries. That's for the employee who works 4 days a week in the library and 1 day a week on our information systems.
He's really good.
Pardon?
He's really helpful.
He is really helpful. It's Matt who
Yeah.
actually helps the public
That's great.
also in that capacity at the library. So does a great job, and so that's just covering small salary increase there. The 2 additional computer-related expenses at the top of page 7, computer equipment maintenance, we're proposing to go up by $2,500, and software licenses up by $5,000. You'll recall, and you can see it actually when you look back at the actuals, this was an area where we knew that we were going to need to invest additional funds because when we did our IT improvement plan some years ago, we recognized that we were not keeping up to date with software, which exposed us to, we created cybersecurity issues and concerns, and also just legal licensing, the obligation we have to make sure that we're all properly licensed for the use of the software that we do use in town government. We're up to date with that now, but in order to keep up to date with it, we are proposing an increase in that cost.
I have a question. What are we doing to protect the town from ransomware?
So there are a number of different ways. The 2 most important ones are actually 3. As part of the improvements that we did 3 years ago now, Patrick, I think, in the implementation of the plan, it was about 4 years ago that we did the planning and about 3 years ago that we implemented the IT improvements. We went from about a dozen servers. Most of the different departments had their own servers, and they were in various stages of not only obsolescence in terms of their age, but also some had been kept up to date better than others in terms of software. And as the software is allowed to become outdated, it becomes less and less secure. And there weren't proper firewalls pretty much anywhere in the system. And so there were 2 significant things that happened at that time as part of those improvements. We slimmed down the number of servers to just 1 with a redundant 1. And we put a proper firewall around that system. That sort of secured the framework of the program. That's not what an IT person would call it, but the basic design of the system is now such that it is protected in the first instance and easier for us to keep protected as we go on. The other way in which we need to protect ourselves beyond the overall system is by keeping the software that is on each machine for each that each employee uses up to date. There's a process called patching for that, and that's being done now remotely and automatically by our vendor. It's something that used to happen kind of haphazardly. It depended on the sort of awareness of each individual user, how well we were patching any particular piece of equipment. And so now that happens on a regular basis. All the pieces of equipment that have any particular kind of software all get updated at the same time when the software, that particular software, is being updated in order to protect against intrusion. So the software companies see how threats are emerging all the time, new threats are emerging all the time, and then send out a patch of how to protect their particular package from what they see emerging out in the dark web, as it's known. And so so those are the three ways. There's two that are part of our upgrade of our basic system, and then one that's just a better practice for how we keep ourselves protected.
Thank you.
Sure. And I will say, unfortunately, that doesn't guarantee that we won't suffer a hit at some time in some manner. We have to stay alert to that. We see a lot of emails that come in that are potential threats if you click on it the wrong way, and we do a lot of education, keeping employees informed about what to be on the lookout for and what not to open. The bad actors out there are getting better and better at making it look like an email that's actually part of our daily operations. And that's true for everybody in all businesses everywhere.
Questions?
Yeah. I noticed there's a line item for GIS mapping.
Yes.
In this department. This is not connected to like planning department work.
It is where those expenses are borne. So there is GIS work done in planning. There's GIS work done in by the engineering tech in Public Works, and I believe some also in the assessor's office. Patrick is nodding. So that responsibility is shared, and the costs are borne here in general services.
And then two more quick questions, and then I'll be quiet. Town report, just a kind of reminder that one of the things we talked about a while back was making the town report more visual and accessible.
Yes.
And I'd love to see.
So when
let's
we
move towards that this year.
A week from tonight, we're going to go back over our list that will be as complete as we can make it of the things we know you want to see more of, and some pending decisions that you need to make by the time we get done with this budget in January. And one of the things that we'll be identifying on that list is the desire to see some visual representations of the budget. And as we talked about at the time when this first came up early in this process, what we'll then show you, our intent is actually to prepare some of that over the next few weeks and bring it forward in January when you're going through that checklist of remaining items. So you'll actually kind of get a preview of what we were thinking with our own skills and our own tools at this moment, can at least move that needle a little bit in that direction, with the idea that there are some greater, more sophisticated, more interactive things we can do with this as we go forward in the future. But we plan to show you some pie charts and some other graphic representations to see if it's heading in the direction that you want to incorporate into the town report.
Great, thanks. One final thing. Board salaries.
Yep.
Not super popular topic, but I just want to bring up the fact that like in the 5 years represented in this budget, they've remained at 17,000.
Indeed.
How long have they been at that rate, at that level?
A long time.
Long time.
We can look back to find out when they were last raised, but it's a while.
Yeah.
Well, and represented in town meeting, but 4 or 5 years ago or so, they increased the board salary.
Yeah,
Did
like
they?
maybe 7 years ago or something like that.
Yeah. I think
And there's usually a motion
It may have been
or
more
an
than
inquiry.
Oh,
We
I've
might need
heard
20
of
grand
Yes.
each at the end of this.
Right.
And others.
so I'm not throwing this out there as a joke question. This is a genuine question.
Sure.
That's about equity. It's also about like we often, for example, with the town attorney, we have a discretionary 2% increase. I know 2% of our 3,000 a year is not a huge amount of money, but it's a gesture of like trying to keep up with rising costs, right? Because, you know, this 17,000 has effectively become less and less, you know, over the years. And
Certainly. And we've had pretty robust discussions, sorry, I'm jumping in here.
No, you're fine.
At town meeting over the last few years about that balance between volunteerism, which is basically what we're doing with a stipend, and people not being able to afford to serve on the board. So there is that issue. But you can argue both sides of it, and so.
yeah.
I'd actually rather argue it here than in town meeting any day.
Well, that's why I wanted to at least bring it up so we could talk about it a little
change,
bit.
and then the town could change it or
Sure.
accept it or add
So
to
when
it.
we argue it there, it
certainly,
always
but-
comes out to
or-
some number that we're never gonna agree on.
Right.
Some huge, crazy
Where is
number.
that on this page?
That is on the very first
Yeah.
item at the bottom of page 6, very first
Board
item
salaries.
under general services. And if you want to spend some more time and think about numbers now, certainly, I'm not trying to short circuit this, but since it's emerged as a new thought this evening, if you want to be able to reflect on it and address it as one of those unfinished items that you'll address again in January, I'd be happy to put it on that list, whatever's your pleasure.
That makes good sense.
I might as well.
Works for me.
Oh,
I think we should. Let's put
Chris
it on the
Mays has a
list.
good headline tomorrow.
He's gonna get-
Daniel advocates
Unanimous.
I know, I'm
He
actually
gets his own
surprised for
parking
you.
Daniel
spaces.
advocates for a raise is tomorrow's headline.
So one of the things
What does
that,
that
you know,
mean?
I've been trying to draw attention to is like people's salaries and whatnot, which I think is appropriate in terms of transparency. And, you know, and our salary is part of that. And I'm not expecting to get rich out of this, but I just want to maybe advocate for like at least a cost of living bump, you know,
Truth,
Yeah.
That could be applied to all of employees in the area as well.
Yes.
So I would recommend a minimum wage of $25 an hour for both the board and everyone else that's employed in the area.
Let me get my
Thanks
It's a lot of
calculator.
hours.
I think, didn't we come out to like $2 an hour one time when we talked about it?
I have a general
It's always a
question.
robust conversation at town meeting, and it's worth having it again no matter what we decide. I wouldn't encourage us to spend a whole lot of time on it, but we can if we want, but it'll come up there, and the conversation is generally about, is it volunteer, is it a paid job, what's the disadvantages and advantages of a paid job, and all of that, so whatever we do, it will be reconsidered,
Liz?
even if we do nothing.
I would like to take a look at our goals for the year and see how they would transfer into the following year and see if there's a need for budget for any of the goals that we want to accomplish.
Okay.
Like, do we do that generally?
We do a quarterly review of the goals.
Yeah, but we
think
don't
I
do it in
usually-
terms of whether or not there's a budget
We want to add
impact
something to make things happen.
associated with
No, I like that
making
idea.
something happen.
Right.
And I think that would help us advance our goals.
So,
Not sure what she
in the direct relationship way that you're describing it, that hasn't been
Doesn't
recently
happen.
done,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm just added it to the list. I think in general, it does happen by the sequence of the
Yeah.
activities throughout the year, right? So we do goal setting in the spring, long-term financial plan in the summer, budgeting in the fall, and then in the winter, and then, sort of cycle on through again, intentionally so that there's a flow from setting the goals to, having them incorporated in some fashion into the budget. A lot of times the goals, and we can do the more precise, reviews so that you can satisfy yourself that it's being addressed sufficiently. A lot of times the goals relate to sort of relative level of effort on certain things as opposed to something new that needs funding because there's nothing in here for it. When there have been those things that have emerged, we've actually specifically put them in and called them out.
Yeah, well, I would just like to have that review because,
Sure.
first of all, I don't think we've had a quarterly review in a while. And second of all, I'd like, while we're going through all this, to plug that in.
Right, sure.
Actually, this is the month that we do the review.
It's on the January.
January.
agenda.
Yeah, first, yeah.
Yep.
Because of budget.
Every third month. So yeah, you had in October and you will have a January, but that's great. I mean, in January, actually, you'll also be finalizing the budget. So as an item on this unfinished work list, it'll be perfect to actually bring the two together.
Great.
At one of those January meetings.
Would it
Just
be
in time
possible
for the election.
Amazing how things work out.
Yeah, would it be possible to try and plan that agenda so that the review of the goals sits a little bit higher? The
Absolutely.
last time we had it, it was like at the
Yeah,
end of like a really long meeting.
Yeah,
Sure.
Put it off for a
it
meeting.
gets like the
We
bum's
sometimes
rush.
kick it off, sometimes too.
Yeah.
So the budget is going to show up as old business. When we go moving, tonight is the night that we finish doing the first time through. Next week, it'll be still new business because it's the list of, these are the things we need to address in January for you to say, yep, looks like our list, or tell me to add things to it.
Yeah.
But when we get to that in January, each time that we're further doing budget work in January, it'll be showing up under old business because it'll be going back to those unfinished pieces. And we can incorporate right out of the gate, that first night that you're going back to unfinished business, we can incorporate the goals as do a review of the goals and then get into the budget work so that it informs the work that you'll do throughout the month.
Because the goals are unfinished business as well.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Very much so.
Well,
And it, on this note,
as they should be.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Looks like we're moving into risk. My
Yes.
favorite.
Risk is a Parker
And-
game.
Here's where we have that great news. We talked about it in the overview a month ago. We've been working hard on improving our workers' comp. First, we improved the policy, the procedure around it, and we've been working hard to improve our actual experience there so that we can bring down those rates. After years of very substantial increases, sometimes exceeding 10%,
As you can see.
it's flat this year
Yeah.
across the entire risk management budget for workers' comp, general liability, occupational health, and our insurance deductible, which is the place where an expense would show up for something that is covered by passive but not 100%.
How'd you do that?
Actually, we did that,
We did.
and we did it with years of hard work. So what we identified in the comprehensive review of town operations 5 years ago was the workers' comp costs were going through the roof, and they were going through the roof in part because it's one of the symptoms of not having an HR director. So that is going to help even more. But frankly, what you see in the results here, since Sally just joined us last June, is actually the result of what's gone on under Patrick's leadership and the work of all departments. We created a better policy that addressed two separate things, employee safety and prevention, better than we had been doing before, and getting employees who do get injured back to work faster, whether that's on light duty assignments or just through bringing them back into their normal assignments in a more systematic way than we had before. There's a lot of data that shows that that's actually better for employees, for their overall health and their in their personal lives. It's better to not be idle and spending a lot of time sitting and healing, but rather get back active as soon as possible. And it's certainly better for the taxpayers to get an employee back into the workplace and providing services. And so our first creation of that better way of doing business in our procedure, and then following it over the last few years, we've been reporting annually that we are making progress in terms of how the application of these better practices in our daily work is improving our performance in terms of how much workers' comp activity we have and how much workers' comp claims, the value of those claims. But because these premiums are set on multi-year averages, it's taken a little while for that to show up. And this is the year when the last 3 or 4 years worth of really intense effort in this area is paying the dividend.
That's
Do you
great.
think it has potential to go down?
It has the potential to go down. What will drive that, again, because it's multi-year averages, our own experience may enable us in the next couple of years to see a decline, but whether we actually have a decline or more flat performance like this is going to be determined by what's going on out in the marketplace. So the combination of two things set the rates. It's your own performance relative to the norms out there in the world for similar employers. And then there's also just what's happening in the insurance industry. They refer to it as hard markets or soft markets. When it's a hard market, the premiums are going up for everybody, even if your performance is good. And so we can't say with certainty that we would see a decline in the next couple of years, but there's a possibility we might.
It's also averaged over a 6-year period, is it?
Yeah,
so it's hard
multiple
to
years.
see
I don't know exactly how many.
Yeah, it's hard to see a big change.
Yeah,
Even if
yeah,
there's a
it
big-
is always a gradual change. That's correct.
Great, thank you for that.
Sure.
We're gonna move now to the middle of page 8 to employee benefits.
Employee benefits. So the first item isn't actually a benefit, but we needed to place this someplace, and so since it is part of employee compensation, we placed it here. We have this line item called salary increases. I mentioned it in the overview a month ago that we've proposed $30,000 as a placeholder. I'll be back to you, I hope, in January. We're making progress on the work that we're doing in analyzing non-union employee wages. I hope to be back to one of the January meetings to make a recommendation to you of what changes we should make and ask you to allow us to implement those immediately. So there will be an FY20 impact that because we're going to be less than half of the fiscal year and at a magnitude I think we can manage in terms of the overages and underages in a budget of $18 million. I'm confident that we can do an immediate implementation because I think that's going to be the right equitable thing to do and not put ourselves in a financially precarious position. But then that impact for a full year, right, whatever that amount actually ends up being, that amount for a full year rather than a partial year, plus the across-the-board pay increase that may be awarded, whatever that may be, we put a placeholder for 2% in the budget that would happen on July 1st, will need to be accounted for in FY21. And so for that purpose, we put in this placeholder. It's really very much a thumbnail figure. It was we had to put a number in back in October when we didn't yet have a good feel for what the magnitude of the recommendations might be. I'll make sure that I relate what I ultimately bring to you in January to this $30,000 placeholder so that you know sort of how it's fitting together in the projection.
Great, thank you.
Peter, just to be clear, the $30,000 placeholder is a reference to only a partial year increase that we'll be discussing?
No, so the $30,000 would be a placeholder number for the full FY21.
Okay.
The partial year impact would happen in the current year FY20.
Gotcha.
For the period from sometime in January through June 30th.
Yeah.
And that's what I was suggesting. We'll just need to absorb within the overages and underages for this year.
I misheard you. I apologize.
Yeah.
It was alarming that maybe we were only looking at a partial. So.
No, the $30,000 was my best estimate at the time of what the overall impact of this might be. And again, we'll be very precise in describing the what and the why when we bring it back to you, so you can see both the financial impact and the reasons why the adjustments are warranted, or at least I believe they are.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you have a question? I thought you looked poised.
Elsewhere in benefits, this is where we're seeing the 10% increase in the health insurance line item because premiums are going up a substantial amount again this year. But it's where you're seeing also those two reduced line items, the opt-out and HSA payments and the HRA expense, areas where elsewhere in the health insurance program we've been able to identify savings. And that's not through any particular changes. We've made changes in previous years in the benefit. And then what has happened is, we needed to budget cautiously because we weren't sure of the impacts of exactly how those would affect the overall cost of the program. We've got enough experience now, particularly with the HRA program, to realize that we had budgeted more than was needed for that. And so we're proposing about a $65,000 decrease in the HRA funding and a $20,000 decrease in the HSA. And that's based on actual experience. We're pretty, we're very confident in the accuracy of those numbers. So the net is for all employee benefits in toto, about $100,000 increase plus the $30,000 for the salary increases is $130,000, and that's a 4% increase over the prior year for benefits.
Great. So, can I ask, what made you think the HRA expense had to be so large last year?
Because the way that works, there's a certain amount of risk we take on with HRA because the town is funding. So there's each household bears a certain amount of the premium, but not the whole. I'm sorry, not the premium. A certain amount of the deductible risk, and then before we reach the actual deductible with Blue Cross, there's a portion that has grown now to be larger than the employee's portion that is in what's called a health reimbursement arrangement, the HRA. That's where the town is actually paying the
health benefits,
the claims in that space, so that the household expense is still capped at the amount that's been agreed to with the employees through the collective bargaining agreements, but we reduce the overall expense to taxpayers by having the town pay up to a certain level of risk. Then once we've hit that deductible, Blue Cross is paying the rest of the bills. And so in that HRA space, you're not going to ever expend 100% of the exposure that's there, of the potential risk to the town. Some employees and their families are going to be fortunate and not even exhaust even the portion that they're responsible for themselves. Others are going to, exhaust that and get up into the HRA layer, but not all the way up to the deductible and into the Blue Cross coverage. And so there's always going to be some amount of, it's not really savings, but the town's actual expenses will always be lower in the HRA space than 100% of the town's exposure. We've worked with our advisors from the Richards Group to identify sort of an expected level of claims. And then what Patrick and I have done is increased off of the advice we've received in order to protect the town, in these early years. This is only our third and entering our fourth, I think now, year of being in the HRA program. And so in the early years, as we were entering into this and then increasing the amount of risk each time, we wanted to protect the town against having more claims than budget. What we have found is that extra degree of caution ended up being unnecessary. And so we're bringing this back to being closer to the actual statistically expected claims. The thing we all need to recognize is someday there will be a bad year. So we're still budgeting this in a manner that allows for some variations of good years and bad years. But if we had a very bad year that exceeded all the reasonable statistically expected levels of claims, we will have a year when our HRA expenses exceed our HRA budget. We're trying to avoid that, but just in the normal variations for this kind of expense, there will be a year occasionally when that happens. What we've done in tweaking this number this year is bring it to a level where we think we still have, some protection against that happening, but a lot less cushion in order to make sure that we're not, collecting $64,000 worth of taxes we don't need to collect.
It's interesting because the whole concept of an HRA is supposed to offset the cost of health insurance, yet the health insurance just keeps going up.
Oh, but at the time when we implemented the HRA, it actually reduced our health insurance premium. And then in the years when we were increasing that exposure, we started out with a certain amount of risk and then we grew it to the point where now we get quotes each year about whether taking on more risk would be worth it. And what we're finding is we've kind of maxed that out where because of the fact that the town is taking all that risk and it's only going to be the occasional more serious claim that penetrates up into the Blue Cross coverage, Blue Cross doesn't give us as much of a discount anymore for taking additional risk on. And so we're at the sweet spot, at least for now, of how much risk we ought to bear. As we were increasing the amount of risk we were bearing, Blue Cross kept giving us better and better deals. And so there was one year when we actually went way down, and then other years when we stayed relatively flat. I think it was like down 1% or up 1%.
Yeah.
This year, because we're not taking on any more risk, we have an increase in the premium of about 10%.
But even last year, that was the biggest increase as well. It was like
It
14%
was,
or
and last
something
year
like
it was something different. So this year it's sort of more, it's normalized. Last year it was the result of a few catastrophic claims that we had where we just had really bad experience that they corrected for in the amount of premium charged.
Thank you.
Franz?
Franz Reichsman. I'm wondering if you have any idea what the outer bound might be in terms of exposure on the HRA. I mean, theoretically, it would be some amount for each employee, which obviously is not going to happen, but I wonder if there's some kind of percentage function of it's 10% chance we could go this high and 20% chance. I mean, just some idea of what you're leaving.
We know exactly what it is, but we don't have it at hand. So
I need to know it right now.
I'll make a note of that, and we'll make sure that we cover that another night to reveal that information. When we did the insurance renewal, we spoke specifically about that back in October, I think it was. We'll bring that insurance information back out as we go through the additional review.
Thank you.
Sure. We'll wait for a slow news night. Pull that up.
Go ahead.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah,
I can just, I want to make a comment that, like, personally, it's sort of a personal comment. This stuff is the most difficult for me. This, just even keeping HRA and HSA and all of the insurance stuff. And I've decided recently it's because it's a pretty morally reprehensible position and system that we have going on here. And that's nothing to say to our
Not us.
well, nothing also to say about the people who are providing the service for the town. It's just the system just drives me crazy, and that's why I almost don't want to understand it. That's how bad it is.
Heard.
Let me double down on that, Tim.
Yeah.
The other
Well, is there a
advantage
doctor in the house?
Is there somebody in the house that gets sick? Like, everyone gets sick, right? And so the actual number for 2017 was whatever it was. I wrote it down someplace. But I was also just looking at like regular people's premiums in the world in 2017 and comparing them to today. Because like we look at these year-on-year increases, and yeah, year-on-year, it's still pretty bad, right? It's 10% is still pretty bad
And that's
within this
lucky.
kind of budget. But year-on-year, between 2017 and today, it's actually 31% for regular folks to get just the premium, right? And, you know, when we look at our budget, we're looking at like changes over time, right? And we're saying this is okay and this is not okay. You know, we can live with a couple of % here or there, but, you know, we have really very little, I mean, I know the town has done a lot to control costs with health insurance, and in order to control costs, some of that has meant employees taking on more of that cost, right? Some more cost sharing, and that has an impact on people's desire to go to the doctor sometimes, you know, desire to stay well. But Blue Cross is sitting there happily raking in their over $2 million from the town of Brattleboro. We're one of how many towns in Vermont? And presumably every municipality has a line item in their budget that is this large.
And the Vermont Care Board let them.
True. Every year at the Green Mountain Care Board, yes, they argue for hours and hours and hours about actuarial numbers that mean nothing to most average people. And I just, you know, I felt like when you guys had the meeting last week and I was watching on telly because I was homesick, and we had the resolution from the League of Cities and Towns about marijuana. I feel like as a collection of municipalities, we need to acknowledge that this line item in our town budgets is unsustainable.
Yeah.
And as such, we need to make a fairly bold statement that this current system is not working for us, and it's not working for the taxpayers of Brattleboro. And I'd imagine, you know, even though the town employees get a good benefits package, they're now having to shoulder more of the burden. You know, one of the things that's messed up with this system is that it does pit people against one another as well, right? Because some people have a good plan with their insurer, some don't. Some don't have any kind of plan at all, and they have to cobble it together. And it just stinks. It really stinks. And I know that the select board of Brattleboro is not about to change the entire system, but we can at least use some of the power that we have through the League of Cities and Towns to say this is not okay.
I agree.
We can also tell our legislators.
Oh, and our legislators know.
To report
Yeah.
to the Green Mountain Care Board.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think if you look back in the resolutions from the League of Cities and Towns, every organization that has employees, there are resolutions going back for years saying this is unsustainable, it's killing us year after year after year after year. And it's obviously not controllable by the state, not controllable by the municipalities.
Well, yeah, the municipalities perhaps, but you know, as a state, we almost did it.
Not even close.
I agree.
And there was a
With
huge
Daniel.
effort. Robin's not here, but she was very involved in that process, as were a lot of other people. The state can't do it on their own.
I saw you made a note of that, Peter.
I did.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Medicare
and
for
I have
all. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Nope.
No, I'm just pointing out that Medicare for all would make a big dent.
I have a league board meeting on Thursday.
Great.
I'll take this message into that meeting. I think it is important that we also each individually communicate with the legislators that we have contact with, because that's where the river's going to meet the road.
True.
Yeah, let us know if you want any suggested language or anything.
I've got some language.
Other than it stinks.
Actually, I thought I might share that. and unsustainable, honestly. I think
It is unsustainable.
we have had discussions here on multiple nights around these issues, and I think it is important. While it won't be new to the radar of the leadership at the league, I think it is important to share that as we've been going through this process and found lots to be relatively satisfied about, and some questions and some pending matters, that the one that really has generated the largest degree of angst for you as a board is this one, because it's so expensive and so far beyond our control.
I think it's important to, it is sustainable, obviously, because we have been sustaining it for years and years and years. We raise the taxes, that's how we sustain it. And you can go back 10 years, and you went back 3 years and found 30%. You go back 10,
Sure.
actually go back 8 and it's doubled.
Yeah.
And 8 or 9 and before that it's doubled again.
Yeah.
We sustain it because because our central government will not deal with it.
I think Daniel might have been using a larger
Yeah,
sustainability, meaning on the individual level, it's often not sustainable. Yeah. But agreed.
Well, so like when I feel like one of the things that folks in the town want to talk about is, my taxes are going up, right? And this is one of the drivers. This is a major driver. So people want to talk
Every
about
year.
we can't afford a sustainability officer or a sidewalk plow or what have you.
Right.
But here is over $2 million.
is this for all of the employees in the town, this $1.7 million?
Except the utility fund.
And parking.
Okay.
And the parking fund. The employees who are in the utility fund and the parking fund, their insurance expenses are borne there. I think it's important for us to note, though, and I'm not at all pushing back on the broader societal concern that you're raising, which is obviously valid, and the fact that you'd like to sort of not just acknowledge that, but raise that to some greater level of advocacy, at the league level, I think is entirely appropriate. As it relates to our proposed budget here in the town of Brattleboro, one thing I want to make clear for anybody who may be paying attention out there is that while the premium is again increasing substantially, in this proposed budget we're showing a 10% increase in the premium, the cost to Blue Cross as you've been characterizing them, that our overall program is only increasing by about 2 or 3%. And again, I don't have the numbers, the exact numbers right in front of me, because they're embedded in some materials related to the insurance program that we went over on a different night. I'm sorry I don't have that right at hand. But because of the contributions that the employees are going to be making beginning January 1st to pay for a portion of the premiums, and because of the savings that we're proposing in the HSA and HRA components of this, just in the things that we can control in our own administration of this benefit. The actual cost in this particular year from FY20 to FY21, the cost to the taxpayers is increasing by only about 2 or 3%.
And I think it's really important to point out that that really is all we can do, is protect the taxpayers. And at the same time, not to take away from what you said, or that this is really a great improvement over what we were doing 6 or 7 years ago, and it is actually reducing the cost to the taxpayers. It's being shifted to the employees. And fortunately, a portion of it, yeah.
But still,
And that's happening, I mean, that with a lot of, well, you'll see as the school budget comes along, that there's a shift from the state to the property tax coming
Right.
for
I
that
mean,
tax as well.
I read the Vermont Digger piece talking
It's
about
just
a projected.
That's only the beginning. They left out health insurance when they said the 6%,
Yeah.
which is 14% increase.
Right.
I just think it's important to bring up at town meeting what we've been saying. I mean, this $161,000 is, think how we went on and deliberated about that police department canopy. And here we are, just told.
Have you seen it, by the way?
I've seen
Yes.
pictures.
I guess the dollar value of things does not necessarily dictate how much time we want to spend talking about them. Because that's not
So
for sure.
think about how much
yeah,
think about
that's
how much sidewalk for
the point
$60,000.
that I was trying to make.
Yeah. Or at least.
Yeah.
May I move on to something that is good news?
Something we can do.
Something
Yes, you may.
affirming.
Approved.
So under bonds and notes, we have a decrease actually in all 4 lines. It's a very small decrease in the amount of bond principal and related bond interest. But the important 2 line items here are the note principal and the note interest, because we made a commitment 5 years ago that we weren't going to buy equipment any longer with borrowed money.
Yeah.
That equipment expenses are recurring on reasonably regular intervals, and that they are relatively more affordable as opposed to capital projects, and that we wanted to not be paying a lot of interest to folks who loan us money to buy things like police cars and graders and so on. And so we made a commitment not to do that, and the one time we've deviated from that during the last 5 years has been to finance half of the ladder truck for the fire department, because it was $1 million piece of equipment. So we financed $500,000, and we did that because it has a 25-year life, and we're going to pay back that note over 10 years.
We're going to get 40 years out of it.
What's that?
We're going to get 40 years.
I don't know if we're going to get 40, but we're going to get
31.
15 years out of it when we're not paying for it,
Yeah.
right? But we're going to be paying for it over 10 years.
40.
The impact, this is the year when we actually see the dividend that provides. So note principal, I'm on the bottom of page 8, note principal is decreasing by $158,000, and the only thing left in that line item is the $50,000 a year for that fire ladder truck. And note interest is going down slightly, $14,000 to $10,000. But that $160,000 or so worth of reduction is the dividend for not borrowing money to buy equipment.
And that's the benefit of the long-term planning.
Exactly. Yeah. And so shameless plug, if we embrace the 25-year equipment replacement plan and live by it year by year, we'll also be setting aside money for these fire trucks. We'll earn interest that'll help us pay for them rather than paying interest to others. And after this next 8 years goes by, we won't any longer have anything that we're paying on notes for equipment, even the very large pieces.
Great.
The next category is the Human Services. The Human Services Committee has just completed its work, RTM's Human Services Committee, and the recommendation that they are going to make to town meeting. I'm sorry, are we okay?
Yeah,
Keep moving?
I thought,
Nope.
do we usually get a presentation from them, or?
You
Not
don't
here.
normally. You have
Not this time.
sometimes, and if you'd like them to come in and present to you in January, we can do that. They
I'm
have,
just having a sudden realization.
I'm sorry?
Once in a while, we do have that.
Once in a while, you have seen them here. There have been discussions in prior years about sort of the magnitude of this, how much ought to be devoted to this part of the budget. And that certainly was a healthy discussion last year at town meeting. One important note, just in terms of this particular part of the process, is different from pretty much everything else we do, because under the town's charter, the committee, which is a committee of representative town meeting members, get to make a recommendation to their peers at representative town meeting of whatever amount they think is appropriate. And the amount that they've decided this year is $190,105. The question for the select board is, do you want to make your proposed budget match that for this part of the budget? I would recommend that you do.
Yeah.
It requires an additional $4,510 above and beyond what we brought to you, because we brought you something that was level funded from last year at $185,595. But if you are in agreement, then as we move towards finalizing this budget, we'll add $4,510 to this part of the town's budget to raise it to $190,105. And then what goes to town meeting will be consistent both in the select board's budget and in the recommendation from the committee.
I would like to add that money, and I'd like to have the presentation.
Okay.
Because I think before we go into town meeting, we really need to know some more intelligence, what's behind this.
Okay?
That's probably a good idea,
Okay.
if you haven't seen it before. Typically when they come, it's when there's something wrong. Like last year, a couple of people applied.
yeah.
and
Yeah,
then
I
sort of
remember
days
that,
late.
but,
Yeah,
yeah.
but, yeah, it's an amazing
Well, this
process.
gets a lot of airtime
Yeah.
at town meeting, and I want to know what's
Yeah.
behind it.
Great.
Well, I think
We'll
it also,
schedule that.
it gives them an opportunity to really kind of, once again, refamiliarize the public with the process and how, what a great job they do. So I think it sort of works in everyone's favor.
Oh, right. They may rather spend it, be at home and just have to do it once at town meeting,
Yeah.
but they can, yeah, we'll see.
I did have some questions about sort of how it appears, and I'm wondering
I think it might be for that.
well, I'm just wondering, there are older things that have not been applied for years, but they remain as line items. Is that something that we've considered
Oh,
dropping?
yeah. For example,
So-
the drop-in center
Yeah.
has been replaced by Groundworks.
So I see that
see
one
what
that
you're
we
saying.
missed. The standard we apply to line items is if they would be zero all the way across, we eliminate them.
Okay.
We missed the drop-in center in this list, so we'll take that off. But anything that might only have one number or two numbers out of the columns here, but shows some history from the prior years, we continue to show until it has dropped off completely.
Okay.
Phoenix House Rise, the very first one on
Yeah.
the previous page.
Okay.
And then,
Sorry.
I had another question.
The RISE program hasn't been applied? That's weird.
I had a question about the Museum and Art Center, because it appears in auxiliary services
Yes.
as well.
Yes. That is because by prior agreement, long-standing prior agreement, the town pays $7,000 a year towards the maintenance of that facility that is done by the museum.
Oh,
Large-scale maintenance is the town's responsibility. It's not part of the operating museum expenses. It's part of the facility maintenance costs.
No, I didn't realize. I thought maybe it was a typo coming from Human
Oh.
Services, because,
No,
so that's gonna drop off in theory? Or is that the same
If they
$7,000?
take over the building, it will.
yeah, if,
I'm just confused about whether this $7,000 is the same $7,000.
It is.
It is, okay. Yeah. I wasn't being
So
articulate.
The
previously,
same $1,000.
I see, because there was 1 year earlier when it showed up in this list. I see that. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
It was not, in that, at that time, it was not actually part of the committee's recommendation. There's a historical artifact here where there were just a couple of things that were reflected in Human
Inside Human
Services,
Services.
but they were not part of the committee's work, and it was confusing because the committee's number didn't match the select board's number.
Continues to be confusing, at
So-
least for me only.
So we moved a couple of things over into the auxiliary services in this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, even then, there's a duplicate of Women's Freedom Center.
Yeah, there are a few.
So that's because the Women's Freedom Center number that had been up through FY17 was a contribution similar to the Museum and Arts Center number. But now Women's Freedom Center actually applies for and receives funding when it's recommended by the committee and approved by town meeting. They receive that as a contribution towards programming rather than to maintain their facility.
Yep. That makes sense.
So the number that you see, the 3765 that you see in FY18 and only in FY18 was because that was when the town still owned their facility, and it matches the 3765 that you see back in FY17 for Women's Freedom Center.
Yep.
And then 19, 20, and 21 are figures that are from the actual Human Services Committee process.
Because they have their own building.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay?
Okay, and I was
Is
jumping
everybody good
forward,
with
so-
adding the 4,510 to match?
Can I just make a
I wanna
point
make sure
about
we
that?
don't lose sight of that.
Can I just make a point about that?
Yeah, let's,
Do we have where that lines up with our 1% rule?
Yes.
that whole thing was confusing.
So the one, let me say that the 1% marker was not adopted as a policy or a guideline or anything. There
An
was a
idea.
lot of discussion about it.
That's what I was gonna
And a fair amount of support for it, but there was not any kind of a vote about it. Nevertheless, I can tell you that this is going to be slightly higher. Even the 185 was like,
so.
1.08% or something
Okay.
like that. So this is going to be just a little bit higher than 1%
Okay.
at the 190. 1% of the
180,
proposed budget is going to
183.
be 180 something. Let me look at the bottom line.
183, 850.
Okay. Yeah, so 183 something would have been 1%, and they're proposing 190, and you're agreeing to raise your proposal to 190.
Okay.
A little bit better than 1%.
Okay.
I'm interested in still having that conversation about, attempting to cap that at some time in the near future. So we have a large discussion about more of our town budget should go to human services. So to be a little intentional about that, but I'm not gonna say I vote against the 190, but I'd like to just sort of advocate for that a little bit, that controlling that. Because if you look at our numbers, they've gone up quite a bit.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the
You
last
look at our
couple of years.
streets, they look like
It had
crap.
been static
Look
at
at the need.
about
Sorry.
40 for years, and then has moved up.
Yeah.
Look at what's happened to the need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's
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 skyrocketed.
not being supported by the
No.
institutions they're supposed to, so.
No.
that's why we-
Absolutely, and yet we have a limit on our budget that we can't give them 50%. We can't give human services 50% of our budget.
Well, if the town meeting reps decide we can, but it's
I'd like
unlikely,
to
and that's an
suggest-
exaggeration.
Anyway, this is an important discussion
I mean,
going forward.
If
That's all I'm saying.
yeah, and if you want to continue on, it's not my place to say don't. What I would suggest, though, is you've already asked that we bring in the committee to
Yes.
present to you and to talk about the thinking behind their recommendation, and it might be a good night to have a deeper dive as a
sure.
board into the philosophical imperative one
concur.
direction or the other.
Yeah.
And then we'll get Blue Cross Blue Shield down here.
Like, that's what we should be
Don't hold your
arguing,
breath.
that's not.
They would be harder to get to come to a meeting than the legislators are.
We can have them do a dollar for dollar match.
Yeah,
of the,
yeah. Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah.
Ah, my pen keeps leaking everywhere.
Are you ready to move to auxiliary
I
services?
think we have a,
Yes.
I have a feeling we have a comment.
Randy, do you want a pen?
Yes, Ricky.
Donation?
I think it's,
I am in Rosati District 2, and
Brattleboro
with
Selectboard.
seeing a budget that's trying to be balanced, in some recommendations of trying to contact legislators about having a Medicare for all, I don't expect them to grant us more federal money, even if they try. That's very difficult. I think what would be more successful, and I do applaud them for starting 2 years ago to get a blockchain currency in Vermont. That's been legislation that they've been working on for 2 years, and we can extend that to empower and enable us as a municipality to have our own municipal currency to pay for all of our healthcare needs and to pay human services and create that economy.
thank you, Ricky.
Auxiliary services, we have this bottom of page 9, a slight decrease in the streetlights expense. based just on the continued monitoring of that. We received very significant savings over a period of years when the conversion to LED was occurring. The change in the budget here is just reflecting the fact that the remaining amount that was budgeted was just a little higher than what we were going to need each year, and so we've reduced that by $10,000. Unfortunately, that expense is offset by the proposed $10,000 for public health and sanitation, which reflects reflects the cost of the porta potties.
Yep.
Putting them out seasonally. They're in for the winter, but we plan to put them back out when warm weather returns. And we're doing some research into a more permanent solution. We'll have some information forthcoming in the months ahead around that. Unfortunately, the solutions we're finding are very expensive.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to definitely require some grant funds in order to make them happen. But it would be nice to have an enduring public benefit that could come from putting the right facilities in the right locations. There's also a $15,000 proposed increase in the ambulance service. That's the town's contribution to Rescue Inc. as part of the regional ambulance service that they provide, and that's a known increase that's coming.
We discussed that.
We did. You authorized the annual renewal that got us actually up to the $250 we're spending this year, and there will be a renewal next year. It'll be the final year of phasing out that discount that the town had historically received. Rescue Inc. worked with us. We were receiving a discount of over $60,000 compared to our population-based sort of dues obligation. And that was because of something that had been, an arrangement that had been set up back, I believe, in the 70s, but a very long time ago, that reflected services the town was actually providing to Rescue Inc. at that time, and that's why we got a discount. Over the many years since then, the Rescue Inc. had become more fully independent. The town wasn't providing those services anymore, but we continued to receive the discount. So Rescue approached us and asked that we eliminate the discount. It was the right, fair thing to do, but it was going to have a significant impact on our budget if we did it all at once. So we asked for the opportunity to eliminate it $10,000 a year over a 6-year period. They agreed to do that, and we're 5 out of the 6 years into that process.
I have a question. When we talk about our goal setting, I know Danielle and I share concern about the local bus service. So I would like, this is an item in the budget that relates to our goals that I will want to discuss.
Absolutely, and it has remained $50,000 for many years.
Yes, but what we get for it is really what I want to discuss.
I see, okay.
Do you think those folks might want to come on in?
Sure. They come from time to time when you ask them to.
Yeah.
Could be people that ride the bus
Sure.
should come in on that night too.
Yeah, that would be really wonderful.
Okay.
Bronze.
And I don't, is Work Today, is that Emily's program?
Yep.
And it doesn't seem to be funded.
It is not showing as funded because you funded it. When we created the budget initially, there was $30,000 shown, I'm sorry, not 30, $65,000?
Yeah.
Shown in the FY20 actual. No, it wasn't because it's a FY20 budget. In any event, so I apologize, I was heading you off in the wrong direction, but it was not budgeted last year. It was an unbudgeted expense that you
Yeah.
approved
Right.
early in the fiscal year. We paid it, and then because the program didn't get rolling, we received the money back. But the expectation is that the program will get rolling in the spring, and we will recut the check for 65. So next year it'll be showing up as part of the FY20 actuals. If you want to budget some amount of money in FY21, that's something we'll have to have some additional discussion about. Remember that the $65,000 is for a 3-month pilot project, and it's because it was intended to, be seed money to get something started to see how it worked, with the possibility that it might be extended, but hopefully with a much broader financial support from other sources, that we didn't presume to put a figure in here
Thank you.
for that.
Franz Reichsman. On the ambulance service, it's a significant item in the budget, obviously, and I don't recall any discussion of exactly what the town gets in return for that amount of money and how it fits into the overall Rescue Inc. budget. Certainly, they have other sources of funding,
Right.
Including reimbursement from insurance payers, et cetera. So I think it would be worthwhile at some point to provide a little bit more context for that number.
Sure.
Thank you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Because I know my husband had a nice ride in the ambulance, but then he got a bill.
Right. So, having been responsible for an ambulance service in Florida, I can tell you that for the fleet of ambulances and the personnel that are required in order to be ready to show up when each one of us most needs urgent help, $265,000 is a drop in the bucket. It's our local share of the part of their budget that they fund with basically dues. It's a times your population, a certain amount times your population yields the amount that you owe. The overall budget is higher than this. We certainly can provide that information so that there's some fuller disclosure of, the overall finances. Rescue Inc. has processes like this. They're not nearly as visible as ours for sure, but it's a public agency. They provide budgetary information about what they receive from the towns and what they receive from other sources, including insurance, and people just, paying the bill. They also have a subscription service for folks so that you don't have to pay the personal part of that bill if you do receive their services during the year. So there's some different revenue side and expense side information that we certainly can make available from Rescue. I'd like to suggest, based on the volume of things that you need to make decisions about, that we address the rescue question after the budget's put to bed, because since this piece of it here is essentially the town's dues, there's not really a decision for you to make in the midst of the many things you're going to be considering in January. But then when we get on into doing other business, as we get further on past putting the budget to bed, we certainly can have Rescue come in and present to you and describe their inflows and outflows and services.
I think, I agree. I think Francis' point is well taken, though, that it's great to understand that better. It's a little bit confusing to anybody who sees the line item
Transparency
and
is
wonders.
good,
sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I ask a question before we move on from this one? Arts promotion, is that the Town Arts Fund?
Yes.
Could we call it the Town Arts Fund? Because arts promotion is not exactly what the Town Arts Fund is.
Sure.
Works for me.
Yeah. We did that so that it was parallel to business promotion that's immediately above it. We're
I see.
happy to adjust it if the board prefers Town Arts Fund.
Patrick had a comment there.
Yeah, I having nothing to do with the Town Arts Fund, I just thought I'd take the opportunity to mention that the folks who are working on the business promotion would actually they would prefer that be called community promotion. So,
Well, there you go.
so we're, we're all
And
working a
even
little
more
bit on
so
our language.
community marketing,
Sounds
actually,
good.
right? Isn't I think the proposal they brought forward was actually called community marketing?
Yeah, it's the Community Marketing Initiative.
Yes.
Great.
CMI.
I'm
Is it?
fine with
Is it?
both of those changes.
Yes.
Did I make that up?
Yes.
Are you?
I don't recall. I remember
Don't care.
they asked that it be community and not just business promotion.
All right.
But we can work to refine the exact
Well, I
language.
think
So-
Community Marketing Initiative sounds pretty swell.
Yeah.
Better than
So how about community marketing and Town Arts
It
Fund?
is known as the CM.
Okay.
So,
The Town Arts Fund is still accepting applications until sometime in early January. I
There
was
you
just
go.
hanging out with those folks earlier.
Yeah.
excellent.
artswindhamcounty.org.
Thanks,
you.
Daniel.
It's a really great fund for
It is,
local
yeah.
artists, so folks should apply.
Good. Both of those changes seem
Give me
good
a
and
level
common
third.
sense.
Okay, so we will do that. I've got a couple of other things to call out for you based on input we've had from requesters
Okay.
within this section of the budget. So we just this week received a communication from BCTV
Oh, yes.
asking for $5,000.
Yep.
And that's level funded from last year. We, in our staff's proposed budget to you, included $5,000 for BCTV. So there's nothing you need to do about it there.
Yep.
It's already funded to the amount that they've asked for.
Great.
But we wanted to call that out, make sure that you were aware of that. Climate protection, I think it's important to note, this is the place where the $100,000 has disappeared from as a just sort of placeholder funding for what has become the sustainability program and the sustainability coordinator. And the West River Watershed item is actually now going to be called the Southeastern Vermont Watershed. It's the same organization, it's the same amount of funding. They've requested 1,000, we've been providing 1,000. We've recommended to you the budgeting of 1,000, but they've changed their name.
Okay.
To Southeastern Vermont Watershed.
Great.
And
Who are these people?
they do water quality testing and call out when there are areas like elevated levels of fecal chloroform showing up.
Put
So
out
that
that chart every
people can
so
be
often.
aware of where it's cleaner and where it's more hazardous to be swimming.
They come in and ask for money every year.
And I
And
watch
this is
that.
a private group, like the.
It's largely volunteers that do it.
It is largely
The
volunteers.
state doesn't provide funding for this sort of thing?
I watch
It is
that like
it's a
hawk.
volunteer organization that does this because it is not an ongoing operation of any governmental entity.
I think Stuart
Something
Stroth
can't do
is the,
Don't know that.
yeah, the person.
Possible.
supposed to-
Yeah. And lastly, the Chamber and DBA have requested that we in the next to last line item in this section on page 10, we, the staff, proposed level funding of the Community Marketing Initiative at $42,119. The Chamber and the DBA have requested that since the original request a year ago was that 10% of the prior year's receipts be made available for this marketing initiative, that same principle recur as years go by. And if you agreed to do that, then the additional funding, we collected $437,489 last year in rooms and meals taxes. And so the funding this year, if you agreed to this change, would be $43,748, which is an increase of $1,629 over what we proposed. I think there's just a straightforward philosophical question for the board. If you want this to be adjusted each year as the receipts are adjusted, that means it'll go up or it'll go down depending on what's happening with the receipts going up or going down.
That's exactly
Instead
what
of being static.
That's right.
And if, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. If you're comfortable with that, then
Makes
we would
sense.
modify this line item this year to be 43,748.
Yes.
The reason I'm going this way is that when you commit yourself to a percent, that it's a percent no matter what happens. Is it going to be a percent if the receipts go down? Is one question. And second is that means that they no longer come necessarily and talk to us about what they've been doing and why they need the money and just, and show us their.
Oh, no.
They come at our, whatever, we would
And the
invite them.
DBA owes you under the ordinance that created the
Right.
DBA, they owe you two
Yeah.
visits a year.
But this is a
This
separate thing.
is
that we
separate, and
set
it's a
up,
joint
yeah.
project of the two organizations, that's
Yeah.
right. Okay.
I seem to recall the McLaughlin amendment from town meeting required that they come and speak to us.
What was the amendment?
It was the McLaughlin.
What was the content of the amendment?
Oh, we just know the name.
That
Then in order
the,
to-
that the
No, I'm
money
kidding.
was contingent upon select board review.
That's right.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, now the timing of that for me is confusing, but,
Doesn't matter.
okay.
The amendment is there.
But if it's automatic,
Keeps us safe.
automatic 10%, then it's not select board review.
1%, right?
1%.
Oh, it certainly is subject to select board.
10%.
10%
10% of the
of
We wrote
receipts.
down 1%.
of the
10%.
RNM.
It was wishful
Yeah.
thinking.
So, I think I heard a majority of voices saying, yes, go ahead and
Yes.
make that adjustment, and that our
Yes.
practice will be 10% of the prior year's receipts going forward.
Yes.
Yes.
I think
Okay.
to do otherwise would be disingenuous to the spirit
that's
of the
fine.
meeting.
I agree.
Just need
And
your
of course,
direction.
it doesn't mean that it's gonna be like that forever. It's just
Right.
going forward, that's what we're doing.
Subject to our review.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Subject to
As you
it
review all
showing
of it.
some effect, some positive effect.
Yeah. This is sort of making me think about the process at town meeting whereby people try and whittle away or add on to the budget and they are told we cannot adjust individual line items, we can only adjust the overall amount of the budget.
That's correct.
Right?
Yep.
So we sort of nodded our way to 10% of the rooms and meals tax from the previous year. And if folks in the community thought different to that, and they were town meeting members, there wouldn't really be a way for them to impact that?
There is a way, if you as a board want to place that question before representative town meeting, which is you have the authority to make anything its own article.
Okay.
You have an obligation to make as separate articles those things that are brought to you by petition.
Okay.
And you don't have any particular obligation to make individual elements of this budget their own question, but you can do that at your discretion.
Okay.
Okay, so
Thanks.
then let's get back to this community marketing initiative, and that we've okayed a new 1% amount, but
10%.
what?
10%.
10%.
Sorry, that's my fault.
But if we wanted to review it individually, what do we do?
You would, when we bring you would tell us you want that to be its own separate article at town meeting. And when we bring you a draft warning for town meeting, it'll have that item isolated in the same way as, for instance, the $10,000 a year back when it was $10,000 a year for climate protection. Year after
Every
year
year.
after year
Yeah.
was its own separate item, even though it was included within the town's budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so, because the way that it's presented here is seemingly automatic, but when they came to discuss this proposal that they had,
Yes.
it seemed clear that it would be reviewed by us each year. So how do you reconcile those two things?
By the fact that you have the authority over what you send to representative town meetings. So the direction I think I've received from you tonight, not by motion, but by general consensus, is that you want us to show you a budget unless you change your minds or unless representative town meeting directs otherwise. You want us to bring you a budget each year that reflects this line item as 10% of the prior year's receipts for the rooms and meals tax. And that's what we as staff will do from year to year to year until told otherwise. If you want that to be a different number, you as the board, in modifying our staff proposed budget into a select board recommended budget for town meeting consideration, can make that number anything that you think is appropriate, and any of the other numbers, actually, pretty much anything. I mean, there's a few that are obligations like what we just talked about with rescue, but most everything in here has some degree of discretion for the
Well,
board to decide.
And we can still call it out, no matter what we tell Peter to give us a budget of. We can pull any number out of here and call it out as an article. So
You
it can be
absolutely can.
in that
Right.
budget and be its own article that they can be hashed out on the floor.
That's right.
I'm not as concerned about town meeting review as I am our own select board
Sure.
review.
Yep.
I mean, I would think we would want to have them come
Yeah.
and present. I mean,
Yeah.
This year was a little unusual because,
Right.
you know,
It's
just
new.
getting up to speed.
Right.
Yeah.
But we'd want to have them present before this meeting,
Yeah.
where
So
we have this
that's
discussion.
where we'll
Yeah.
have the review, that when they come here and before we put it at the budget.
So,
probably could
just
do
so
it
I'm
today.
clear, you're not asking for that in January because you've just
'Cause we just
seen their
approved the
proposal
thing.
and
Right.
approved
Yeah.
that they move
Correct.
forward.
Right.
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 But what you're saying is annually, you would like to see that kind of a
Got it.
presentation
Yes.
about how did it go last year? What are you
Yes.
planning for this year?
Yeah.
Yes.
Got it.
A
And what
detailed
actually-
presentation.
and
presentation.
what's measurable, what measurable
Sure.
changes.
Absolutely.
Franz
Franz,
has a question.
come on up, Franz.
I'm still a little unclear on exactly how it's going to work in terms of the review of this budget item. Now, if it just goes in the budget with everything else, you would then request that they come in, but they would still get the money regardless of what they said in front of you?
Not necessarily.
I think this year.
So would you be able to withhold the money
Oh.
and say, oh, we don't like that? You're not getting it even though town meeting passed it in the budget?
Town
Not for
meeting
that
passed
year.
it in the budget last year,
Right.
but town meeting is only going to approve it as part of the budget this year.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is I don't see how that gives you the right to review that amount of money and withhold it if you don't like the plan for the coming year.
Well, this year, we're giving them a pass because
Right.
they
So
haven't
we'll
had enough
review it
time.
for 2022.
I think there's a different answer, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
So,
Peter.
I think if there's another McLaughlin amendment, right? So the reason that they had to get this board's blessing before receiving the 42-119 and going forth with the plan this year was because town meeting said, yeah, we're okay with that funding, but subject to the board approving the plan of how it's going to be spent. And so there was that process we went through, and the board did approve the plan, and we've cut the check, and now they're off and running. The town meeting could put that kind of a condition on it again, in which case there would be, even for budgeted funds, a step along the way where it's, may we please proceed. Or if town meeting didn't put that kind of condition on it again, then the funding would be there for this purpose for FY21, but there'd still be an annual decision, FY22 and beyond,
Yep.
for the board to decide whether it wants to keep funding.
Yes, I understand that. And what I'm saying is, if you want to have that opportunity to do what you did this year for the amount of money to be spent next year, it seems to me that the only way to do that is to bring it out as a separate agenda item so that town meeting could say, but the select board has to review it. If you fail to take that step, you won't have that opportunity.
That's true.
Thank you.
I don't really feel the need for that opportunity, but
Well,
And do you have any
in
comment
fairness to
report?
what was said last year at town meeting, and to be consistent with that, we should do it that way.
I think we need to have it as a separate article.
Yeah.
Anybody, well, we need general consensus. Probably can't just be Liz and I thinking things.
I don't, can
Do
you
you wanna
explain to
have-
me why you think that's necessary?
Because I kind of agree with Franz that if we want to retain any kind of, I'm gonna say control, even though it's not the word I want to use, but just for this, for 2022, then probably town representatives should give the same authority they gave for this fiscal year, which is, yes, the money's there, subject to board approval, board
So you're
review.
talking about town meeting control, not necessarily our.
Talking about town meeting granting us the control to give a review for 2022 inclusion.
2021.
I mean,
Yeah,
for 2021.
from the 2021 budget.
But if
Okay.
the money was in the budget, and next year they come to us and tell us what they're gonna do, and we don't like it, we can still not fund it? Can we not fund it?
You could not fund it for the following year. I
Yeah.
think Franz is right, that if you want to maintain year by year the ability to see the plan and have the money get spent only if you approve the plan, then the way to do that is to make it a separate article on the warning, and you get to word those articles, right? Within certain boundaries to make sure that they're legally proper. But you could word the article this year in a way that attaches that string.
in
That
perpetuity.
the funding will
or
be
just
made
for a year
available
at a
in the
time?
amount
Year
of
by
It has
year.
to be year by
X,
year.
subject to the approval, the marketing plan being approved by the select board.
Great.
If you know you want that, we'll make a note of that now and we'll proceed accordingly. If you want to have some additional discussion or receive any additional input around it, we could put it on the list for January.
Let's put, I would prefer to think about it and put it on the list for January myself, but,
I'm with you.
because
I'm
I'm
fine
a
with
little
that.
bit,
Yeah. I need to think about it some more.
I'm a little bit concerned about putting it out there at town meeting already when the plan hasn't had a chance to go into effect.
That's true.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
while I don't oppose the idea in general, that's,
It's worth chewing
You
on.
want you want them to have a year of trying it.
well, I think that was the spirit of the
Yes,
motion and
that
everything.
is
Like,
true.
otherwise, you're putting it out there again as a second chance to vote on this, sort of the same question. But we can think about it and
Sure.
discuss it again. You see what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
because
I
they
do.
took
Yep.
they're just getting started.
Right.
Good, so we'll talk about it again in January. That gives
Put it
us
on
time
the
to chew that over.
Good.
Was that the end of auxiliary services?
That
I
is
got a
the end
little
of
lost.
auxiliary services.
Great.
Yep. So
Okay.
next is facilities maintenance, and that's a couple of pages on. It is on page 12, in the middle
Yep.
of the page.
Got it?
Small section that didn't exist. The reason why you see no actuals for 17, 18, and 19 is we created it in 20 to consolidate
Oh, yes.
the individual custodians at different facilities into a team of people who maintain the town's facilities together. And when we did that a year ago, we neglected to put in small amount of funding for clothing. It's appropriate for this group of 4 employees, 3 that are funded here, and a 4th one in the parking fund, I believe. It's appropriate to fund the clothing allowance that is applied to similar employees. And so that's what the $1,125 is. The $47.23 is just the increase in wages.
Okay.
Okay?
Fire department does their own maintenance.
They do. Municipal Center. Small changes here related to the fuel expense, slight increase, electric expense, slight decrease, and very slight decrease in utilities, which is water and sewer. Overall, about $2,000 of reduced expenses, a 2% decrease to $89,415.
Great.
Wait,
Okay.
what? What just happened?
We just
We're still thinking about
we just saved
facilities maintenance.
$2,000.
okay.
Staff salary.
So we can definitely talk about both of those if you'd like. The
Did you lose
Some of
time?
these
facilities
went
maintenance.
in from here to here, right?
Facilities maintenance is custodial services.
Yes.
And the municipal center is just that. It's the costs of maintaining this building. They're much smaller than they used to be because of the police department having exited and the fact that we don't have a dedicated custodian in the building anymore. Facilities maintenance provides services here like they do at the other facilities.
Great.
And it also went quickly because none of us want to talk about and spoil anything that might be happening at the municipal center,
Oh,
right?
right, sure.
Yeah.
Also, yeah. All right,
Okay.
regional.
Okay.
Bottom of page 16.
Regional expenses. Yes, bottom of page 16, this is just the Wyndham Regional Commission and our share of Wyndham County expenses, which is just the sheriff and the court.
That's what it is, okay.
And these are imposed.
Yeah.
These are numbers we receive from other authorities and make payment upon.
Yeah, but has our population gone up? Isn't it based on population?
No, their amount per person has gone up.
Tricky.
It's like
Not
you
my
get
favorite
a bigger
topic.
bag with fewer chips in it.
What does the Wyndham County Sheriffs do within the town of Brattleboro?
So we
Serve warrants.
the places that actually receive direct services from the sheriff pay a contractual fee to the sheriff.
Yeah.
We're not one of those. This is our obligation as one of the municipalities in the county to pay for sort of the underlying carrying costs, and it's primarily court. I don't believe there's much that applies to the sheriff. I don't know exactly what the breakdown is.
All right.
At the risk of, making January longer than it actually is,
Oh, God.
can the Wyndham
Can
Regional...
you do that?
Yeah. Can the Wyndham Regional Commission tell us what we get for our
If you
28,000?
would like them to appear
Yes.
before you and
Yes.
discuss their services,
If
sure.
BDCC and SEVEDs have to come in, then yes.
It's the same.
It's all
Wyndham
again.
Regional you're
Animal.
picking on? Wyndham Regional?
That's correct.
Wyndham Regional?
Not county tax?
No?
Yeah.
Well, so when I saw county tax, I was like, wait,
For what?
for what? And,
being in the
Peter already
county.
explained.
Let's have the
It's
county
quite
So maybe the
executive
line
come in
item
and
should be
explain.
called
Wyndham County
Wyndham
Yeah, I-
Superior Court.
Sheriffs and Court Expenses or something. I don't know.
Truth. I can see where that would be useful.
Sure. Or maybe
not.
just Wyndham County
Yeah.
instead of tax, because it's really not a
It's
tax.
not a tax, right? It's a fee.
It's a
It is.
fee for living here.
It's charged to the municipality, it's not charged to taxpayers.
Right.
I think Franz is going to have a whole section in his report about how we change the names
Nomenclature.
of.
Of things we don't like.
All right. Solid
I
waste.
actually know a Wyndham Regional.
Which I
Brandy's moving us
Solid
on.
I am.
Okay.
Solid waste.
Where is solid waste,
So
Peter?
just to be clear, I heard the request from this side of the table. There's a consensus that you'd
There
like
is
to hear
for
from
me.
Wyndham Regional
Yes.
in January?
About y'all.
Okay, I hear a third voice, so
That's right.
we'll ask them in.
Thank you.
He stops
I'll
listening
remain
after the third
silent.
I
voice.
want everybody in.
Well, unless you keep talking, it takes three of you to give direction.
No comment.
So, we're down to the very last.
All right, we're on page
Which is
19.
Solid waste, and here, I
It's
I have the
literally one item.
unsatisfying explanation of the continued volatility in the world's recycling markets is going to be the greatest determinant of whether we ought to adjust this number. And what I'm talking about is the transfer to
Transfers.
solid waste that's at the bottom of page 19. We are proposing a 9% increase, and we're doing that based on our current best estimate of how the improved revenues coming out of coming to the Wyndham Solid Waste Management District, which is reducing our amount of assessment fee that we pay to the district, how that's being offset and more than offset by reduced bag revenue because we're throwing less garbage away and increased recycling costs because of the tremendous volatility out in the world's recycling markets. And so we don't go through a specific solid waste budget at this time of year. We've actually thought in recent years it will eventually be a best practice. It's something we ought to do. It's not its own separate fund the way utility and parking is, and we'd like to incorporate it into the general fund and make this easier. The problem is that then you're making a commitment now to a solid waste budget that is really not just unknown but unknowable at this point to do responsible budgeting. Yeah. And so what we'd rather do until there's more stability out in the recycling markets is estimate what we think the transfer is going to need to be and report back to you in the spring, as we've been doing for several years now, about what we think the real budget ought to look like for the next fiscal year when we're 4 or 5 months on, actually 6 months on compared to when we actually prepared this budget. And at that time, as you know, in recent years, what's been required at that time, we're hopeful that this coming spring will be the first time in 4 or 5 years when we haven't had to do it. We've made a supplemental transfer. We try to be cautious with this number, not be aggressive with it because of the fact that it affects the tax rate. So we may find when we get to springtime, we still haven't really quite nailed it, and there might need to be a supplemental transfer done at that time. We'll avoid that if we can.
Okay. Thank you for acknowledging that it's imperfect. And then I don't have to go, oh God, I hate this.
You still could.
I could.
Can I ask something? It's not really about solid waste per se, it's more about like data. So I was looking at this number, and it's not insubstantial, right? It's like 555.
That's nowhere near.
And like, looking at this document, sometimes it's hard to kind of like make comparisons in like dollar value and percentage change. So maybe as part of our improved town report, we could have a kind of like top 10 items by dollar value and top 10 items by
Great idea.
percentage increase and percentage decrease.
Sure.
And
Good
then,
idea.
you know,
That
just
was
pulls
three,
out some of the
Peter.
stuff.
Excellent.
And we
You
could
mean,
have a
you mean
picture next to it.
overall, the entire budget?
Yeah.
Like a cover sheet.
You know, like healthcare's this amount of
That
the
would be
Yeah.
better
It'd be
than
like
public
program budgets,
participation.
yeah.
solid waste is this
There's
slice of the pie.
40%.
Or at least, you know, it's
Yeah.
just
Not
it's
that
a
you
way
necessarily want to
An
eat that
executive
slice of the
summary.
pie.
It does invite.
God, I
it does
miss
invite.
those.
I think it invites a little bit of editorialization. Is that the right word?
Edit, sure.
Like, I don't know. I mean,
By
So,
whom, Tom?
so we already do it.
if one person's doing,
Let me acknowledge that we already do it, and I feel very strongly that it's useful. What it's not is visually dynamic, but that's what your budget message is.
Yeah.
The budget message over 8 pages, single-spaced typewritten pages, is the attempt to provide that executive summary. These are the things of greatest importance this year, and in the context of our long-term planning. Now, we've had multiple requests to make some of this information pop better. I totally get that. I think that's a good idea. We're going to work on that. We're going to show you some things, and you're going to tell us whether it's heading in the right direction or not. We can make part of that this top 10 items thing. The thing I'd like that you acknowledge in that is the difference between, say, the top 10 individual line items and the top 10 areas of expenditure is a big difference,
Yeah.
right? So within healthcare, we know there's 4 or 5 different line items. The one big one is the premiums.
Right.
But if you want to see how the healthcare program, the health insurance program is compared to the rest, then we need to make a judgment call that of what line items to cluster.
that's what I was
And
talking.
we'll be happy to
There
do
you go.
that. We already
And
do
that's
that
where
when we're preparing the budget
editorial
message.
judgment
So you'll be
questions.
talking about
You can come forward at
the
least.
department totals or the category
Not
totals.
necessarily even that. So again, going back to health insurance. Health insurance is 4
It's
or 5 line
offset,
items within the dozen or so line items of employee benefits. So we'll focus on a piece of a program rather than a whole program or a single line item when we report that piece out. And so there's a lot of judgment involved in that. There's a lot of judgment involved when I decide what to summarize in the written document that sits in the front of this. What I'm trying to do is be as transparent as possible about, you know, in 18 pages of individual line items, what's the most important to look at to get a feel for whether we're responsibly serving the community or not.
Peter, just a kind of a clarifying question to using healthcare, there are those 5 things a month, but there's also the payment to Richards for the services they provide.
That's embedded within the
And then
Blue Cross
administrative
premium.
costs for various staff for the parts, the things that they do.
Actually, we don't charge, so like there's portions of our time, Patrick's and mine, now Sally and others,
They
Brenda
spend
in finance
time-
for sure.
Yeah.
So there are employees who spend time working on health insurance. We don't separately charge that out. We don't separately charge it out to anything except
Right.
the utility fund and the parking fund.
Franz, would you like to come up and say something?
Yes. I have a few things I'd like to address. I guess maybe now's a good time. First of all, I'll just note in passing that it strikes me that you're talking about moving from a New York Times model of annual report to the USA Today model. I'm not sure that's
I
a
just
good
want people to
thing.
understand the budget.
I know, we need things to be accessible.
As far as solid waste goes, first of all, is it conceptually true that the sale of the trash bags is intended to cover specifically the amount of trash that's disposed of, and that recycling and composting is separate from that?
Yes.
So philosophically, we're still doing pay as you throw. We're just not counting composting and recycling as part of the throw.
That's exactly right. At the risk of annoying my bosses, let me just drill that down just a little tighter.
Please do. No.
So there's actually a state law. It's not just a philosophical foundation under this. There was a state law 6 or 7 years ago that said all municipalities in Vermont have to, it was called variable rate pricing. You have to reflect the cost of collecting and disposing of garbage in a rate system that people will pay more if they're throwing more away. There have been places where that's worked out pretty well and places where it hasn't worked out necessarily as well. It's been an overwhelming success in Brattleboro. And so our volume of garbage has gone down. Our volume of recycling and compost has gone up year over year. And so, yes, our bag revenue is down because it reflects that part of the waste stream that is least sustainable, right? And so our costs where we transfer general fund monies into the solid waste related expenses, which is also the complicating factor here, is it's not its own fund, and we kind of treat it like it kind of sort of is in order to compartmentalize those expenses and comply with the state law. But the part of that budget on the expense side that is in non-garbage is larger, and so our cash expenses that aren't reflected in the pay-as-you-go, pay-as-you-throw system have become larger.
But that's also historically, our garbage was much higher,
Correct.
and so it's gone down.
Correct. When we started this, in fact, even though we were already, we had a pretty robust recycling and composting operation already underway, we were, much higher. I think the first year our estimate in bag revenue was around $500,000, and we're down to 300 and something now as the proposed amount of revenue. And each year that has declined, so it's still a moving target for us. It hasn't stabilized yet.
But also, before pay-as-you-throw, our garbage tipping fees were much higher, right?
The actual tipping fees were not higher. The amount paid in tipping fees were, because more garbage was being thrown away.
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
Yep.
Tim?
Can you help me complete this sentence, because I used it a couple times and I want to make sure I'm using it right.
Sure.
In reality, only our people pay as you throw, but only 40% of it only accounts for 40% of blank. Is it the overall or the garbage portion?
No, the 100% of the cost of garbage collection and disposal is covered by the bag revenue. But
overall.
But the waste stream, the portion of the waste stream that is represented by garbage has gone down, down, down. We'll be happy to trot out those, update the numbers. We've done a report like that within the last year or so, but we can show how it has changed, not only what's happening currently, but how it has changed in recent years. And it's really, I mean, it's something to celebrate for our community. At budget time, it's hard because of the fact that, this, just based on these local factors, it's a hard number to predict. And then the wild volatility in the world's recycling markets makes it impossible to predict. So it's been really challenging for us on the budget side. But as far as a program and the intended benefit of reducing the amount of garbage and increasing the amount of reused materials in one manner or another, that's been an overwhelming success.
When you do those numbers, will you include what the expenses were before pay-as-you-throw?
Sure. Go back, grab those.
I thought bag revenue paid 40%. And
Sounding like it's more a third of the total stream. Only the garbage, right?
So
We're still paying the
you're saying
compost
40% of the solid waste expenses?
correct.
That's possible.
To the taxpayers paying 60-ish and the bag revenue accounting for 40-ish.
So
Is that accurate? Because
I can
that's
tell you that
kind
in
of
just
a
a
big
moment.
picture.
Yes.
Franz
Where are you
said
getting
yes.
that, Franz?
Well,
From me?
if it's 380 of that in bag revenue and 555 in budget.
Oh, you're using actual
That
numbers.
gives you the percentage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just looking to confirm the bag revenue, but if you've double checked it?
I haven't.
380?
I'm
Okay, let me find it then, we'll use a real.
I'm quoting the town manager loosely.
I think that it's just an important figure for people to
Yeah.
understand that they're not financing the entire operation.
Actually,
People do
it
seem to
won't
have a
appear
challenge with
here.
that.
It's in the solid
It's
waste
revenue, because
budget.
it's in the
It's
solid
not
waste
general
budget.
fund budget.
Yeah, so we'll have to make
It's
that part of
somewhere
the
around
report.
there.
We'll
I'm not-
make
yeah.
that part of the statistical report we do around solid waste for you.
I look forward to that.
I feel the same way about this that you feel about health insurance, by the way. I'm squirming the whole time right now.
Well, let me have you squirm some more.
I
Is
know,
it
Franz.
true that the solid waste district has its budget meeting on Thursday?
I believe we passed a budget at our last meeting. I think there is a public comment meeting.
Ah.
But,
After the budget passes, we have the public comment.
Oh,
That's how they do it.
Reform with that board.
I think the finance committee, of which I am a member, submitted a budget. It was accepted by the board, and it now
Goes to
I think
the
goes to the
towns.
public.
Okay. Well, it just seemed, from what you had said, Peter, that you don't have any way to know what
Right.
the budget looks like for the solid waste district right now. But I had seen something, I thought it was going to happen, maybe it just did happen,
Yeah.
that they approved the budget.
No, let me
Yeah,
really,
our solid waste budget and their solid waste
It's
budgets
different.
are very different
Absolutely.
budgets. So their solid waste budget, of which we are affected by, is going down by 4%. Our solid waste budget is not going down by 4%. It's likely going to decrease, and we're showing the net transfer from the general fund to the solid waste fund as increasing by,
by $55,000, I think it is.
yeah.
$45,000. But let me be really clear about that. So the part of the town's expenses that are controlled by the decisions made at the solid waste district are really restricted to the assessment that's imposed upon us at the solid waste district. We also pay to Triple T for the collection services they provide. We pay tipping charges at the places where our stuff gets disposed of that passes through Triple T to us, in the cases of the recycling and the garbage, and then is a separate expense at the solid waste district when we're dropping off compost material, and yeah. So there's a bunch of different factors that have nothing to do with the solid waste district budget. That are the major drivers of whether ours is going up or not.
Okay. That's all I've got on solid waste, but I do have a couple other things. So going through the budget over the past few days, there were a few things I didn't understand that maybe others would like to know more about as well. First of all, in some of the departments, the salary increases were substantially more than 2%.
Yes.
And some of those were the ones where the union has a separate negotiating process.
Right.
And I guess what I'd really like to see is an explanation of for those departments that did seem to be on the high side, exactly what the contributing factors were, and in particular, with regard to the executive session negotiations with the union contracts, or other contracts for that matter, why it was that we came to the number that we came to. You know, what's the explanation? Why is that the right amount? It might not, of course, be the preferred amount from the town's point of view, but just some idea about how that went and why it's a good outcome, I guess, would be helpful. Because all that takes place in such a non-transparent way that I'd really like to know a little bit more about how it ended up that way. There's a couple of individual items.
I mean, can I float a proposal about that? Like, because that sounds like something that's going to take a while, and I know that we also have some other kind of wage-type topics. Is there like a wage conversation?
Well, or we should give a break to the interpreter.
Well, I thought it was good that you didn't answer that, so you didn't lock yourself into anything. But it's a concern of mine, and I think other people would like to know it too at some point in the process. That's all.
I can give an answer now that's the general case. To be very specific to the various pieces of this, obviously, would require a much more detailed response. We have been addressing that department by department when we talk about the salaries for each of the different departments. And in the presentation of the collective bargaining agreements that have been approved, 3 of the 4 have been approved. The 4th one we expect to come in January. And you've rightly made the point to us before that those agreements are long and complicated and sometimes hard to digest. And we typically have brought them forward as quickly as we could once they've been finalized, which doesn't give the public much chance to look at them. So our intent is, once the 4th one gets finalized, to bring it out into the public view for 10 days or 2 weeks and then have it be heard here by the board. But I would say that each time one of those agreements, even though the document itself may not have been out, we've gone through very explicitly, including in the cover memo that makes it a really easy read, exactly what's happening to wages, in terms of the amounts of increases that are being proposed.
Where would I find
bargaining
that? I don't recall seeing it. I may have not been paying attention.
Okay.
Is it available at the
Sure.
online?
I'd be happy to give you the 3 of them that we've presented so far that disclose, what the wage increases are.
Maybe they were in the supporting documents and I didn't look at them.
Actually, it's usually summarized in my memorandum, and then it's the details of it are in the supporting documents.
Okay.
We'll have both of those things out in public for longer when we come forward with the NEPBA proposed agreement sometime in January.
Okay, well, I can talk to Jan maybe, and she can probably steer me in the right direction.
Yeah, we can give you copies of the 3 ones from earlier this year, and you let me know if you want to sit down and talk about those.
Okay.
The one quick thing, if the board can allow this, is in the budget, the way it is transparent in the budget is, and I believe there's reference to this in my budget message too, although I'm not 100% sure of that. As you go through department by department and you see places where employee salaries are increasing by more than 2%, that's the impact, almost entirely, that's the impact of the collective bargaining. And what we talk about is the fact that in the first year of implementing a new collective bargaining agreement, there's always greater impact than in year 2 and in year 3, because you're making changes. You're, to the degree that you've agreed to anything that restructures any of the pay scales, that's going to be felt in the first year, and then the incremental annual increases occur in year 2 and in year 3. So that's where it is made transparent to the public. If there's a line item of employee salaries, and we always call it out if there's like a new position created, which almost never happens. Last year we had the community say you got to have a sustainability person, and we're going to have one. It's good. And year before that, we asked for an HR director, and it was approved, and so we have one. Outside of that, there's I can't remember a time when we've added staff. So what you see, when you see changes in the cost of employee salaries, is anything that is beyond the amount of the across the board pay increases that are all very transparently disclosed is the impact of the collective bargaining agreement.
Okay. I'm concerned maybe in more detail than that, but
Okay.
let me get caught up on that later.
Sure, we'll give you the 3 packages from earlier this year from when the 3 other collective bargaining agreements were approved.
Okay, yeah. A couple of items in the police department. One was I couldn't figure out how much they were paying per bicycle for their electric bikes. It's not a big deal, but I was just curious about that. And, you know, I don't need an answer
I
right
think
now.
the line item is going to buy 2 bikes. I don't remember the
Yeah, I
exact
think you're
cost.
right, actually.
And, okay, and I think it was under equipment, went up by $5,000, and that was
So that'd be
specifically for 2 bikes?
$2,500 a bike.
Okay. The other thing is under equipment maintenance in the police department, there's a
Yep.
$3,000 increase that was attributed, at least in the discussion, to additional storage of
For the body worn cameras.
for the body-worn cameras, yeah.
Yep.
Now, the chief said that he needed 2 terabytes of storage to keep track of all that stuff. Well, you can go online and buy 2 terabytes of storage for $89.99. So I'm wondering how that corresponds with the budget item and the
That's something
$3,000
we'd have to
increase.
give an additional response to. We wouldn't have that.
I don't know the
top
answer offhand, but I
Okay.
do know that server storage is vastly more expensive than PC storage. Vastly more expensive,
Apparently.
yeah.
Okay. It's just, you know, I just was scratching my head because I've got a 1 terabyte hard drive and
Right.
it didn't cost, you know, a lot of money. So,
You can get a
okay.
terabyte hard drive for $100 or less, and
Yeah.
not for a server.
And it might include redundancy, like backups,
And security.
maintenance.
Yeah, we'll find out and we'll provide the information.
Well, let me continue picking on the police for a minute here. So the staff salaries in the police department went up 5.2%, and I thought maybe some of that was because they were going to be more fully staffed and have less overtime. But the overtime budget also went up, so obviously that wasn't correct.
So that's not what's driving that, and the what you'll see when you look at the difference between the actuals and the proposed, year to year, we propose the right amounts of money for salaries and for for the base salaries and for overtime. For if we were fully staffed, because we're always striving to get to the place where we're fully staffed. But most years we're not fully staffed. Some years we're way understaffed, you know, as low as 21 or 22 sworn officers, where we're funded for 27. And so that delta shows up in the actuals as an over expenditure of overtime and an under expenditure of salary. And that when that happens, we don't like to have as much overtime as we've had in some of the recent years. But when that happens, it's always a significant savings to the budget. The underage on salaries always significantly exceeds the overage on overtime.
Okay, so the budget has sort of a best case scenario, and then it changes from that.
Well, no, actually, the budget has kind of the worst case scenario where we're expecting to fully expend our salaries budget and have a lower cost for overtime. It's the best case scenario for operations.
That's what I meant.
And the worst case scenario financially.
Yeah.
And but we don't normally achieve that.
Okay, also, let me just correct myself. The overtime budget is not increased for the year. It's
I think it's
level.
flat. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I just noticed in the general services, there was no increase in the finance committee's budget this year.
Still zero.
Still zero.
Town meeting will increase it, don't worry.
Okay, I think that's everything.
But-
Thank you.
But the degree of our appreciation continues to increase.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to talk to my lawyer, Ms. Rosati, about this.
Okay. So solid waste was our final item on tonight's agenda. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to Liz.
So moved.
Oh, a motion to adjourn? That was another question. Liz has made the motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourns at 8:38, I'm gonna say.
What I said?
So way off my guess.
I don't know.
By a lot.
But yeah, getting this information to the press.